My name is Sophie Harker. I'm an aerospace engineer currently working on electric aircraft.
Cool. Is that is it common to have women working on electric aircraft?
Not that I've come across. That's more of an engineering and aerospace problem in general, I'd say. And I mean, I'm sure you're aware, engineering is not great for female representation. And aerospace is even worse. It's improving. It's definitely improving. But yeah, it's I have my engineering team at the moment. I'm the only woman, so it's yes, very, very much a rarity that I've come across anyway, but there may be other companies that are a bit different to myself.
And how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because my background is actually in maths. It's not in engineering. I didn't study engineering. I studied maths at university, and when I studied it, it was very much 50-50 male female, and I didn't know that there was this like overwhelming majority of men in the industry. So when I joined, it was a bit of a surprise, and I didn't know, and I kind of just wanted to be treated like anybody else did, and was kind of very almost dismissive of anything that was like a woman's initiative in aerospace or in engineering. And it's only as my career progressed that I was suddenly like, oh, actually, I understand this now. I understand how this impacts things, and have had events happen that I'm like, oh, okay, it is different, and there are things you have to think about. And the main sort of issue that I face generally is just sort of more in my own head, where I'm thinking, is this because I am who I am doing what I'm doing, or is this because I'm female? Or it's those questions that are in the back of my head. So it's not necessarily outwardly, it's more inwardly, I'd say, is the thing. And I've always got to be cognizant of and quieten that voice and be like, no, it is because you are capable of what you do.
I'm just trying to understand that switch, because I'm picturing you at university doing maths, and it's 50-50, and everything's like just feels normal and nothing to kind of be conscious of. And then you get into industry and then something switches.
Yeah, I think it's just a change of environment, a change of possibly I wasn't prepared for it. Those that studied engineering usually were the minority in their classes. And I think I just wasn't prepared. I hadn't heard, I hadn't known, there was no like warning that you were going to be, you know, the only woman in the team, which is what I usually am, and have been for most of the 8-9 years I've been doing this. But it's nothing like negative happened to cause that. I think it's just a environmental thing where you're immersed in that, and one day it kind of just creeps up on you and you go, oh yeah. And there have been comments made like across the map, and it does sort of make you pause and rethink, but it's never been like a fundamental I can't do this because, if that makes sense. There's never been that kind of barrier. It's more just sort of like a small eating away, like I know people call it like a microaggression, but that kind of feeling that's sort of embodied inside rather than necessarily physical barriers outside. Does that sort of make sense? So it came over time really, and I'd say it took a good year or two to really sort of understand how that being a woman in engineering does not limit you by any stretch, but has limited others in the past, and has had those difficulties that you've had to face. So it took me a good 1.5, 2 years to figure out that was there. And then it's taken me, I would say, a good further 3 or 4 years to sort of like be exactly who I am and not care about those barriers. Do you know what I mean? And say, okay, so I am, okay, while I may be doing aerospace engineering, which is predominantly male, I'm very much like have an individuality as a woman, and like that's not a bad thing, and I can go and do that and be exactly who I am, and it represents itself in my managerial style for sure, and the way that I sort of conduct myself. I'm very much like I am who I am as a woman, and that is not going to change. It took me a long time to get to that point, I'd say.
Well, first of all, thanks for your transparency on that. But also, that switch from academia to industry happened to me, and I was in engineering, so I was kind of used to those ratios, like the underrepresentation of women, and other boxes that I could have ticked, like being dark-skinned and things like that. And so even though those ratios existed in academia, when I went into industry, it was really jarring. It's a different mindset. Like, you have people from all kinds of experiences, people that are further on in their careers, new, and the playing field changes.
Yeah, it's a power dynamic, I find. Like, going from academia and very much being a student in academia as well, not necessarily working in academia, being a student in academia, you were kind of protected to an extent. That, not to say there aren't issues, and maybe I'm a bit biased from having a maths course where it's very black and white. It's very, you're right or you're wrong, and you've done the right thing, you've done the wrong thing. But there's a power difference when you go into your career, because suddenly you're answering to people, and people are responsible for your career. They have a say in how you're performing, they have a say in what you're doing and what you like. That kind of power difference, I think, is what's so jarring, because before, when I was just doing my assignments and whatnot, and tests and exams at university, I'm again in maths, I'm right or I'm wrong. Whereas I got into work and suddenly it was like, oh no, you shouldn't do it that way, or you shouldn't do this that way, or you haven't done this, or you haven't done that, or you need to do it this way, or you need to act this way, you need to look this way. And it's definitely a presence, and whether it's cognizant or whether it's just like those unconscious biases that we all have, it's very much still there. But it's changing, it's getting better, and there's a reason why I will, whenever I do anything like in public or on stage or giving talks or even this podcast, and I look a little bit wild hair wise and things, I will always look how I'm going to look, and I'm not going to try and turn into something I'm not, because it's there was that kind of imagery issue, I think, when I joined as well.
Yeah, I mean, can we expand on that, because that's quite a major part of being an individual? I'm not even going to make it gender specific, like how we package ourselves for the world really affects kind of everything. So what was the journey you've been on?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one, I think, anyway, in that when I first started work, I kind of dulled myself down in many ways, in terms of I was always very professional, grey suit looking. I'd read somewhere that women should be as neat and tidy as possible in the office, and I come from a working class background, so that was always sort of told, you need to be quiet, and you need to listen to so and so, and you need to be very well presented, and you need to be tidy. And having my big curly hair like I do, people have often said it's very messy and frizzy, and how much better I look when I straighten it. And so for years I straightened it and I plaited it. And I remember somebody telling me, it wasn't in my company, it was actually external, but somebody telling me when I was quite young that to be taken seriously, I'd either have to cut my hair very short or keep it straight and neat and like in a ponytail or a bun. And I did for a really long time, because I thought that's what I had to do. And that kind of reflected in the way that I spoke, the way that I acted, the things that I said, the things that I wouldn't say, because it kind of that seeped inwards. And then I can't remember exactly when it started to happen, but I kind of realized that was just exhausting. And it took a few years, and I just decided to start being more myself. And then when I was fortunate enough to win Young Women Engineer of the Year, I kept like who I was, and I started being a bit more outwardly myself, like kept more wild hair, kept like wearing bright red suits and yellow suits, and I kept myself a bit more. And I started speaking to kids and young girls in particular that were like, oh, I didn't know I could dress like that, I didn't know I could look like that. And so now I make a point of it. Now I will always have like my curly hair. I'll always dress a little bit more wild than I possibly would do day to day, because I think it's important to change that image and say that you don't have to look a certain way to be where you are. And I'm saying this from a very privileged position as just a white person with a bit of frizzy curly hair. I can only imagine how difficult it is if you're dealing with sort of that cross-sectionality, and particularly for sort of like women with afro hair. I do not know how they cope with that kind of pressure from internally and externally from the world. It's just, yeah, blows my mind a little bit. So if I can try and dismantle a teeniest tiniest little bit of that, then I will do.
Yeah, I mean, while you were describing it, I was kind of thinking, who imposes that, you know?
Yeah.
Because you do hear a lot of sort of themes being debated, that, you know, patriarchal system, the objectification of women, that kind of thing. But sometimes that kind of advice can come from women.
Oh yeah, it did. All of this advice came from women. It did not come from men. And it was, I know, again, I'm not criticizing them for giving me that advice. They were doing what they thought was the right thing. And many years ago, it may well have been the right thing. It may well have been, if you had looked like I did, you would be absolutely, you know, put in a corner. You'd be hidden from public view. You wouldn't be allowed near customers or near investors and things like that. Whereas now it's a little bit different, thankfully. But yeah, it often did come from them, because that's what they had experienced as successful. And so that's kind of why I think it's important to be in that kind of public space to say, you don't have to look that way to be successful. And it's a choice to look the way that we do, if that makes sense. Not just, you know, I've decided to make myself fit in as much as possible. I choose actively not to, which takes a bit of work.
Yeah, in some ways it's quite a heavy load to carry, because let's just say, for simplicity, frizzy hair or curly hair is not acceptable. And then you are the one representative that says, I've got curly hair and I'm smashing it in my industry. It's kind of a lot to, it's great to be that role model, that ambassador, but it's also quite a heavy burden to carry. And the reason why I'm honing in on that is because often when we are trying to break convention or update stereotypes and update public perceptions, it's a lot of responsibility. So when you were trying to smash through biases, what kept you going?
Yeah, I think one thing, I'm quite stubborn. So once I put my mind to something, it's going to happen. I am quite stubborn in that way. But I think ultimately it came down to what was the heavier load to carry for me. Was it heavier to have that kind of role model responsibility, or was it heavier to mask exactly who I was and what I liked and way that I acted every day? And it turned out day to day it's way heavier to hide that. And so I was like, right, I'm gonna be exactly who I am and do what I can and lean into it hard. So, and being stubborn, it does help. Like,
did you have anyone inspiring you to lean in to being yourself?
I think everybody does in many ways. There's elements of my background, personality growing up that have influenced how confident I am in certain elements of myself. And I think that's possibly the most important thing. Is I didn't have one person who I was like, I want to be just like you. It was, you came out and you did that, you went and did that, you went and did that despite XYZ, or this is, I really like how you are when you do these things, and I've sort of embedded that in myself. I'm very much the sort of the space industry is my real love. Like I want to be an astronaut, as ridiculous it is. So I have a lot of role models in astronauts who are actually a very diverse set of people in terms of their mindsets and their attitudes and their backgrounds. And so you will have, there's things that I definitely have absorbed in the way that I operate day to day, whether I realize I'm doing it or not, but have come from those kind of personalities, and those backgrounds and how they have moved forward. And one of those is very much like, I don't care what you look like and where you come from, as long as you do what you need to do to get this job done, because it's quite literally a matter of life and death. And that's very much the way that I operate now. Is I don't care what you look like, where you come from, what whatever, the way you speak, your accent, I don't care about any of that. What I really care about is that you're passionate about what you're doing, and that you're going to help us all drive towards that goal. And that's the way I operate, because of that kind of mentality. So I don't think I had a person. I think it was more, I picked up on individuals. And like I could pick up things from my parents, for example, pick up things from my teachers, pick up things from people I've worked with who have been like phenomenally inspiring, people from the media and all over the place. I just pick up those elements that I think as a collective we've started to be more open with the way that we portray people. So yeah, the mix of everything really. It's probably not a great answer.
No, it's an amazing answer, because often when I'm asked the same question, I'm stuck, because there was no one person. It was more like anyone that demonstrated an attitude of self-acceptance, like I was just drawn to. And when I was younger, there were very few people. And over time, that number has increased. Like there's just, and it's really interesting because sometimes, I follow on social media people who really embrace who they are, despite all of the criticism. And it's so weird, the experience of doing that, because I've embraced people who it's less about their message and it's more about their attitude, and then suddenly getting condemned for like embracing someone who's got a message that I actually I wasn't even focusing on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's different things that you can respect people for. I mean, you should respect everybody generally, but in terms of like that extra level of respect for people, there's different levels of it, I think, or different facets of it, in that you can respect their message and you think, yeah, that's a really great message, but not agree with the way they get that message across. And likewise, you can respect someone for being exactly who they are, even if you don't always agree with their opinions and their politics, say. You can still respect them on that level. So I think there are different facets to that, and we've become very black and white as a culture, I think, in terms of you either wholly love that person is perfection on a pedestal, or they've done one thing wrong and they're off the pedestal and we cancel them. And that can be whether it's they've done something wrong or got a different opinion to you, or whether they have lied about something for whatever reason. We kind of very much just, you're one or the other, and it's very hard to put yourself out there and continue to be yourself if you are on the pedestal for a second and then you're going to suddenly fall off it. So I think we're doing a better job in more recent years of being more accepting, but there's places to go, and I'm just really glad that sort of the generation that, while they'll have many difficulties going forward, but they do have those role models who are unapologetically themselves in more ways than one.
What's your day job like? Because to go from mathematician to winning young engineer, it's like, how did you get there?
Yeah, that was quite a learning curve. So I studied maths when I was at university mostly because I was good at it, like at school, and didn't really know what I wanted to do. When I was 16, I went to Kennedy Space Center and decided I wanted to be an astronaut, but didn't know how to get there. I come from like a working class family. My dad's a carpenter, my mum's a teaching assistant, so we just didn't have any kind of experience with engineering or science or anything in that kind of world. So I kind of just followed maths because I was like, well, I can't really go wrong. And the great thing with maths is it doesn't necessarily open specific doors for you, but it closes none. So you can go into whatever you want after you've done maths. So it was a really, really good subject for me at that time. And then when I was 19, I got to meet Helen Sharman, Dr. Helen Sharman, the first British woman, well, first British person in space, sorry. And she was the first person to say, have you thought about engineering? And I was 19. I'd never considered it because I assumed incorrectly that engineering was people that fix your washing machine, you know, put your satellite dish in the house, because it's the only time I'd ever heard the words. And she was the first person to tell me what engineering really was. So I kind of tailored all of my engineering, my maths degree, towards as much engineering as I could. So I did things like relativity and electromagnetism and elasticity, things like that, but very much in the pure mathematical world. Then I did an internship doing software engineering for 3 months, which I absolutely loved. And so you decided, okay, I'm going to carry on. And I moved around I knew I wanted to be in aerospace because of my space love, but wasn't really sure where in terms of engineering wise. So I moved around from systems engineering to design engineering, finally settled on aerodynamics as kind of like a specialism, which I really loved. And then as I progressed up to the sort of the level I'm at now, it's kind of become more generic across lots of different disciplines of engineering. So it was a real learning curve. I did not know anything. I didn't know how planes flew when I first became an aerospace engineer, which is wild. But I understood the principles behind them. So it mostly became a case of taking the theory and then the theoretical world and putting it into a real world. That was the hard bit. And I think in many ways it actually really helped me, because I joined on a graduate scheme knowing absolutely nothing and knew I knew nothing, which meant I was so hungry to learn everything. And I was willing to admit I don't know anything. I almost had the excuse to say I don't know because of this, whereas I think others didn't have that and felt like they had to present an aura of them knowing things and having a base level of knowledge. So I think that genuinely really helped me, and the way that I approach problems is probably a different way to most classically trained aerospace engineers. So I think in reality it's actually helped me, but it was a tough learning curve the first few years, let me tell you now, but we got there.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I think when you have the official label of engineer, people think that you just know everything about engineering. Yes. And, you know, as a mechanical engineer, people are like, oh, can you fix my car? Or how does this work then? And what's that part? Yeah. And it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what that part is called, and I don't know what it does. Even though it's a mechanical part, I don't know. And it's taken me quite a long time to pluck up the courage to say, I don't know. Because I was like, maybe it's just because I'm a rubbish engineer that I don't. And for many, many years, I honestly believe that. And now I realize that actually engineers don't need to know everything. I love the fact that you went into aerospace engineering not knowing how aircraft fly, because that's exactly what's required to be able to collaborate and think laterally, because you come in with a certain expertise that classically trained engineers wouldn't contribute, and it could be the one thing that creates an innovation that just would never have happened if everyone's streamlined in a certain education. So
you're not weighed down by the way it has been done. So you're taught how it's been done, whereas I never was. So I was always questioning, why this, why that, why do I have to do that, why did you do this, why did it was not out of criticism, out of genuine, why did you do that? And it's my number one advice that I'll give any young person coming into any engineering field is, you know nothing. Even when you have a PhD in something, you know loads about this much, but engineering's this big and you know this much. So you will always know nothing. And that is the best place to be like, never be the smartest person in the room. Like, you have to admit to everyone, including yourself, that you know nothing. And it helps a lot, because like you say, that pressure to be like, oh, I should know this, I should know that. No, you shouldn't. No one can. No, like, these things are so complicated, no one can know everything.
I think that's such an important bit of wisdom there to like really absorb, because like even yesterday I was doing something where I was put on the spot to explain something, and I'm part of a team and none of the team was there, and I literally couldn't explain it because I wanted to be able to discuss it rather than explain it. So I wanted to be able to bounce ideas off the other engineers in the team, but because it was just me there, I suddenly had this panic of like, I'm not going to be able to talk for everyone. And for anyone that goes into engineering and then goes into the engineering industry, they may feel that pressure to represent engineering thinking. And I think particularly if you are underrepresented in some way, if you feel that pressure to represent all engineering understanding across the spectrum and you're underrepresented, it can kind of put you on a further back foot, because somewhere in the back of your mind you could be like, maybe it's because I'm underrepresented that I can't speak for all engineers.
Yeah, it's a burden. Like, it's a burden that you put on yourself that you don't need to have, and it's not an individual thing. Everybody does it, and like I still have to go, it's okay, I don't know. Like, it's a really practical example is I work on electric aircraft. I am not a battery specialist. I know the basics of how a battery works, but I can't tell you why this battery is better than this one. I cannot tell you. I don't know. I know how to integrate it with an aircraft and get it flying, but I don't know how a battery works. So people ask me, oh, what do you think of this? And I'm like, don't know. I don't know. I'm not a specialist in that. And it's, yeah, and like at times I'm always like, should I know more? Should I know more about this? And no, because my brain is full with other things. And it is things you have to constantly check yourself and be like, it's okay that I don't know this. And to be honest, and the more that can be honest about it, the better.
Where is the key in all of this? Because with everything you're saying, it just comes with a huge amount of self-confidence.
Yeah.
You know, how are you able to detach and just go, it's okay that you don't know that. You don't have to like now, you know, Google it or GPT and like become an expert. Like, you know.
Yeah, it was in many ways kind of accidental. I kind of got to this. I mean, self-confidence is an ongoing journey you'll have throughout your whole life. But in this sort of area, I'm quite confident to say I don't know. And that it kind of came by accident, because I've ended up moving around doing lots of different projects and lots of different areas. Like, I've worked from like the electric aircraft I'm on now. Historically, I was on fast jets, and before that I was on hypersonic aircraft, space planes, like whole different groups of different aircraft, some that didn't even exist. And I ended up being sort of like my company expert and I mean that expert like this in inverted commas, because I didn't know and nobody else knew, and so I had to find out. But if it got to the point where I didn't know, there was nobody to bail me out. There was nobody to say, you know, what you're wrong, because nobody knew. So if I said I don't know, it was like, okay, so we don't know. So it kind of gave me that confidence. And then because I kept taking on new projects and new different types of engineering, that I had to be honest when I didn't know something, because if I tried to progress without it, I was just, as in progress through the project would just fall. So I had to be honest and be like, I'm taking on something I've never done before. So when I started doing flight control systems, for example, which was my previous job, I had never done flight control systems before in my life. I had an understanding of aerodynamics, which underpins it, but I'd never touched a flight control system in my life. I didn't know how it worked. And so I had to be honest and be like, I don't know this. And so I would go and ask the people that had been doing it for the last 40 years of their life, can you check this? Can you tell me how this works? I haven't thought about this. Oh, that's an issue. Oh, yeah, okay, I didn't think about that. Oh, can you just have a look over this current architecture I've got? Does that make sense? Does it not? Have the other things that I need to change about this? And just keep asking, like, for not necessarily, it's not even reassurance, it's more filling your gaps and knowing you have them, and knowing that's not a bad thing to have. But it very much, that confidence to know and to say that I don't know came from the fact that I had to, otherwise my whole project would fall apart. And it's something I just now retain going forward, because I know that it makes you a better engineer to admit you don't know something. It's kind of like the SpaceX launch that happened just yesterday. Like, there'll be many people that go, oh, it was a failure, it didn't, it fell apart in the sky, quite literally. That wasn't a failure, that at all. That was them learning what they didn't know. And so it's the same principle, and it just comes down to an individual level.
Yeah. And it's funny how the media portrays it as a giant
yeah.
It's like, yeah, and I feel like we don't get taught that growing up, that you learn so much from mistakes, or not mistakes, even that word's a bit harsh. It's like so much from things not quite going to plan.
Yes. Yeah. It's not taught really in our sort of like education system. Like, maths is pretty bad for that in terms of secondary school. When primary school, you're taught, here's the process, follow the process, you get the right answer. And then when you get to university maths, it's a whole new world. Like, no one warns you of this, it's a whole new world where you don't get the process, you get given the answer, and then you get given prove it's right. And so you have to find the right process. So you have to try things. You have to figure out, okay, I know this process, and I know this process, and I know this one. If I combine these two, do I get there? Is there something that's not quite right? Like, you have to do trial and error to try and get to the right place at the right time. And so math does kind of underpin that in you, that you will not know. You just have the toolkit that you try and pull together to get to the place that you've been told to get to. It's something that when we are younger, we're not told always. And like, I mean, everyone has their individual experiences, but I was very much like, A student, very much can't make a mistake, can't get anything wrong, a lot of pressure under that. And if I did, make a mistake and fail at something, or, not get something right the first time, I felt like it was wrong and it was bad, when actually it was right. And it took me until going to university and then becoming an engineer to learn that's the right thing to do. It's okay to lose, it's okay to get it wrong, it's okay to break things, and you learn to fix it. You learn from those failures, in inverted commas.
So is that the transition you've kind of made then? Because mathematics can be very binary. Like, have you kind of moved into that kind of trial and error, iterative space for your job? Like,
yeah. Oh, massively, yeah. I mean, maths was, like you say, exceptionally binary when you learn it in school. It's exceptionally binary. It's, you follow this and you learn how to do that, and you learn how to do that, and you learn how to do that, and then you just repeat it in an exam. I'm oversimplifying, but that's basically the formula. When you get to university, it's not like that. But then no one tells you that's not how you do it. So for the first couple of years, like, I really struggled when I did maths, and it wasn't because I couldn't do it and wasn't capable. It's because I thought I had to know everything right off from the bat, and so revising was horrendous, because I was like, I'm trying to learn literally an impossible amount of formulae by heart. It's just not possible. And it was only when I started getting to my third year, and I did like an integrated master, so my fourth year in particular, that I let go of that and started just trying stuff and doing more and learning through doing, not just reading and trying to repeat it. And there's a reason my scores were like the highest in my fourth year, and it wasn't because I was, an exceptional mathematician. It was not at all that. It was because that breakthrough had come through, where I was like, you've just got to try things, and if it doesn't work, quit it, start again, and try a different route. Like, and I don't mean quit the problem, I mean just quit the route you're on, and start something new. And I do it in my job now. Like, we'll try something, we'll play around with it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, we move on. And we just play around with different options, because we are very much in an experimental early phase where, you know, there's not a lot of electric aircraft flying out there, and there's no rule book on how to do it. So we have to just try, and we have to try a route. And if that doesn't work, or if, you know, it's not perfect, then okay, we modify and we try again. It's not a bad place to be in. It's the only way to make progress. And I'm very much a fan of the phrase, perfection is the enemy of progress. And I mean that in every sense of my life. It's like my motto. Like,
gosh, your journey that you've been on just makes you so perfect for your job. And I really hear the engineer in you. I love this idea of, like, you know, you had to let go of that sort of perfect answer. You had to, I love the fact that you said, you know, learning by doing, because that really is what engineers are all about. Like, they just do stuff, they prototype, they test, they go back to the drawing board, you know.
Exactly. And it applies to so many like areas as well. Like, I mean, science is famously like that, but there are so many other areas. Like, even if you just take being a pilot, like, you could sit in a simulator, or you could read every book known to humans about flying a plane, but until you sit behind the controls and try and land a plane for the first time, you will not be able to land it alone. Like, you have to actually do it. And it's not easy, which is why when you see it in films where they're like, oh, I've never flown this plane before, I'm gonna land, and you're like, no, you're not. Because you have to do it, you have to try it, and you will absolutely fail. And that's why you have an instructor with their own controls to take over when you are about to crash.
I mean, sort of listening to you, really truly sounding like, you know, like an authentic engineer. I wonder why the public perception of engineering is so not what it deserves to be. Do you have any idea?
There are so many reasons. I think there's some big ones in terms of, there's a misconception of what it is I think is the big one. Then there's another issue, the fact that it is so varied. There's not like this is what engineering does cheat sheet, because an aerospace engineer does some very different things to a software engineer, like very different, or very different from a civil engineer. Like, there's so many different types. So while that's wonderful, and I love that about the field, that you can move around and do different things, and that, you know, engineering has a place for literally everyone, it can make it confusing for people if they don't understand. So I think that's a big issue. I think one of the other big issues that we have is that engineering is just not protected as a term. So anyone can call themselves an engineer, and so you don't get that kind of, I don't want to call it prestige, but that kind of common understanding that engineer means basically inventor. That's basically what it means. It comes from ingenuity. Like, it doesn't come from engine, it comes from ingenuity, and that's a different spin on things. So the fact that my only view of what engineering was someone that was a technician, which again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with those careers at all, they're not the same career. So I do think that doesn't help. And then there's a bunch of other things about sort of some of these engineering projects take so long. So aircraft historically have taken between 20 and 40 years to develop an aircraft. That's a really long time. And so there are people that have never seen those aircraft be in development, have never seen, have been working on aircraft their whole lives, and they've never seen it fly, for example. And that kind of length of project makes it really hard to say, this is the impact you're going to make. I think it's difficult. Like, similarly with like buildings, they can take decades to build. And so it can be really hard to inspire people, being like, that will be something in the future. And so for me, what I've had to do to try and counter that is I try and flip that on its head. And I'm like, in 100 years time, whatever I do now will still exist. It will still be in either physically exist, or in sort of history, it will exist. You look at the Spitfire, for example, that aircraft will always be in like memorized in history, and the aircraft I work on now will always be there in history in 100 years time, and that's a legacy I get to leave. So when I'm no longer here, I won't be remembered, but what I did will be. And I think that's a really, like, the biggest, uniquest thing you can have with engineering is that you have that legacy. So if we can kind of change the phrasing to be like more around that, I think would help.
Yeah, I think it needs to be a collaborative process, because talking to you today is so different from the conversation I had last week on this podcast and the week before. And it's like, you know, slowly we piece together a jigsaw puzzle. And I do believe times are changing where you are starting to see the overall picture of what engineering is. And that's basically a bunch of people that love to use their hands and get stuck into the tech and be interactive rather than have that sort of professional distance.
Yeah.
So, and that's just so admirable, whether it's like coding to like building something from scratch with all kinds of different parts. It's like, I don't know, I feel like, I don't know if it's because I'm so close to the change, but I do feel that engineering is, maybe it's Elon Musk, you know, like, I just feel like
yeah
engineering is starting to get a bit of street cred about it.
No, I totally agree with you. So software engineering in particular, I find, is definitely becoming a cool subject. I think the fact that a big push on coding helps. And I think once you've opened up one door, people start to ask, well, what other engineers are there? And that definitely helps. And I do think that the efforts being made in the last 5 years, in particular, over the last 10-15 years, I'm sure, but particularly in the last 5 years, I feel have really stepped up. Even if you look at things like the first Lego League, which is, funnily enough, where I'm going to be heading after this, it's, those things did not exist when I was young. They did not exist to say, these are these fun things you can do, go and do, quite literally, robot wars, and that is embedded in a future career. That's not just something fun to do for a TV show. Do you know what I mean? It brings it to life, and it makes it achievable for people, and it means that people aren't they don't have to wait until it's too late to find, oh, I could have gone and done that as a career, if that makes sense. It's bringing it further forward, and I think the last 5 years really have made a huge difference. I don't know what has triggered it. I have absolutely no idea, but there seems to be this better understanding of what engineering is, and the need for like bigger, larger, more impressive outreach, for sure. I think it has developed in the last 5 years, like Formula One in schools, for example, Vex Robotics, all of those, they've definitely crept up in the last 5 years to almost be not embedded in the curriculum, but not far off it, because they are so good at inspiring.
So it sounds like you're very much immersed in your job, but what other things are you doing that would kind of hint at who you are as an individual? Like,
so I like to keep busy. I have a few things going on at the moment. So I'm currently studying a master's part-time, which is taking up a lot of my time at the moment, and that's in sustainability, sustainability leadership, actually, at Cambridge. And it's amazing. It's the most phenomenal course. I cannot recommend it enough, because that kind of legacy piece that I've mentioned earlier is a very big presence in my head, and I'm very much internally an eco warrior. So I wanted to be able to bring that into the aerospace industry, into my engineering world, as it were. So I started studying that back in September. So that takes up a lot of time. But aside from that, I do a lot of other things that very much make me who I am, and good at what I do. So, for example, I've been dancing since I was 3 years old. So things like ballet, tap, jazz, contemporary, things like that. So I've kept that up my whole life, and I still do it now. I actually teach contemporary, like in a local school, when I have time. So that is very much my creative side of my brain being let out, which definitely helps me become a better engineer as well, because it keeps that there. It's one of those things that I didn't realize as well, that by doing it, it's kind of helped me be more confident speaking and performing, like in many ways, again, up on stage and talking to 200, 300, 400 people about engineering or about anything else, it doesn't matter. I didn't realize why I found that easy, and it was only a few years ago that I was like, oh, it's probably because I've been on stage since I was 3 years old. That's possibly why it doesn't faze me. And so those kind of things have made me more rounded. I do a bunch of other things, but yeah, they're probably the main two sucking up my time at the moment. But yeah, a bunch of other hobbies and bits and pieces.
And given where you are in your career, do you reckon that engineering is becoming more accepting of the choices women have to make in terms of like their personal, like maybe having a family, or, you know, those kinds of decisions?
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's tricky to get right in many ways for many companies and industries across the world, and every government has their own like regulations that enforce and or not enforce in some cases these things. So it does very much depend where you are. But I do think it is definitely getting better, and it's getting better in terms of giving women the rights and the support they need to be able to go and have families or other personal endeavors, without a doubt. But I think one of the key parts to it, which is starting to come out more, and I've witnessed this more and more, is actually supporting men to have those choices to go and do that and have more involvement in, you know, if they have a family life or personal care or whatever they need to go and do, so that it's not just, I don't want to say just, but it's not only a women's problem. It's if you want a family problem, if you are a carer problem, if you have this, if you have dependency, if you are doing whatever you want to do, if you have a charity problem, whatever those things are, it gives everyone the right to that time and that balance. And I think that has shifted the conversation, and that kind of movement to, it's not just, and again, not only women that are having that kind of rights, it's everyone gets those kind of rights. And that I've seen a real shift, and I'm seeing really good, like amazing positive things coming from that. So I think the more that we can bring everybody along to that kind of balance of work versus personal life, the better. And I'm very much an advocate for making sure that it's not, I don't want to use the term work-life balance, because for me it's not that. It's more that you can be exactly who you are, and you as an individual, inside work and outside work. And I think that for me is the real key part of it, and allowing everyone to go and do that. And it's getting there. It is definitely getting there. I like, there are many things that I cannot speak to given my own experiences, but there's from what I have witnessed and seen, there's definite improvements in sort of many arenas.
I mean, there was a time where women had to literally choose / sacrifice. Yep. It doesn't sound like that's the case now, would you say, in engineering?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult for me to say. Like, I mean, personally, if I take like the family as an example, I don't have children or anything like that, so it's very difficult for me to say yes or no. I definitely see more support available, and I definitely see more women progressing through the engineering sort of ranks, as it were, who do have families, for example. So I definitely see it more, which is good in many ways, because it means, you know, if I decide to, that I feel like it's not going to stop me. Whether it does have difficulties, I can't say, I'm afraid, just because I've not had that experience myself. But I see evidence of it improving, at least, because when I first started out 9 years ago or so, there were very few women in sort of senior positions with families that I knew. Well, there were very few women in senior positions, full stop, but even fewer who had families. Whereas now it's much more visible. I see that more. So, and it could just be I'm looking for it. I don't know. But yeah, there's I don't see like major blockers if I decide to do that myself one day, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really significant bit of progress there. Yeah, definitely compared to when I was graduating. So like, in terms of women coming into engineering, because it's come up on this podcast that, you know, I speak to a lot of women who are doing so much outreach to try and encourage more women into engineering. And there's a tiny little bit of guilt that we might be encouraging women into an industry that ultimately won't support them. Do you have that, or are things good?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd call it guilt. I think it's more cognizance. So I'm aware that, you know, when we're encouraging people into these industries, that there's not always the support for them, or hasn't historically been. I'd say I find that less so now. There definitely is better support than there has been historically. But I am also very honest with people when I am talking about it. So if I was talking to a group of, say, 17, 18-year-olds that were interested in joining aerospace engineering, I wouldn't lie to them about it. I wouldn't say to them that, you know, oh, there's loads of women, there's loads of this, it's basically run by women. Like, I will be honest and say to them, you could be the only woman in your team. However, that's not a reason not to be here. And it is improving, and it will take time to improve. And I don't want to use that as an excuse, but it will take time to improve. And even since I started to what it's like now, there's definite improvements. And there's, as long as there are people like yourself and myself and other sort of female engineers out there that will have their backs, then I think that's the most important thing. But for me, making sure I'm honest with them and just prepare them, I think, is the thing, because I wasn't prepared. I didn't know what I was heading into. And I wish I'd had that kind of context before, because I think it hit me harder than it possibly would have if I'd been prepared for it. But for me, it's about just being honest with them. And it is better, but it's not perfect and never will be. But I definitely think we should just be honest and explain what they're going to enter into without deterring them from it. It doesn't, just because there is this, you know, these minority issues as we could call them, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't go and do it. It shouldn't stop you. But
well, I must say, having spoken to you for this small hour, like from like the moment you started speaking, there's a real sense from you that nothing is impossible. I really sort of like get this, I hear in your message this really strong undercurrent of be the change. Like, you don't have to do something because you've seen someone do it, or there is someone out there that exists. Like, you want to do something, you see yourself doing something, it feels right, just go do it. Don't worry what people think. And I love that.
Yeah, I have like a mental image, shall we say, whenever I'm feeling kind of nervous, or like, should I do that, shouldn't I do that, or, you know, should it be done this way, should I challenge this, should I stand up for myself, should I not? I always think, this is really it seems a bit extreme, but it does work, is I always think of this cosmonaut called Alexei Leonov, and he was the first person ever to do a spacewalk. So he wasn't the first person in space, but the first person to do a spacewalk. And he was the first person to, in like the 60s, to go up into space, open the door of his spaceship, as it were, and step out in just his spacesuit. And he nearly didn't survive. It was really bad. Like, there were leaks, his gloves exploded, he nearly couldn't get back in the like, he nearly died. It was pretty bad. But I think about how brave he must have been to step out and to go into a vacuum of space, basically. Not quite a vacuum, but you know what I mean. Into that space with nothing but a harness and a spacesuit to keep him safe. And I think if someone can be that brave, I can be brave enough to wear a yellow suit. Like, do you know what I mean? And so whenever I think, you know, maybe I shouldn't, maybe, you know, I should just go with the flow, go there, I have that image in my head, that picture of him stepping out. And it kind of doesn't always work. I'm not going to say it always works, but it works a lot for me. It helps me. So yeah, that's kind of the way that I approach things, is if he can step out, then so can I.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's such a powerful image to end on. I've got goosebumps at the idea of actually the word brave is the word that's been in my head whilst listening to you the entire time. And then that image just sums it all up. Thank you so much for giving us an insight into your world. You're so inspiring. And I look forward to seeing all the amazing things that you're continuing to do. And good luck with the Lego, what was it?
Lego League, yeah. So it's the Scottish finals, I think. Oh no, English and Wales finals actually. I lie. The English and Wales finals. So should be lots of fun. Lots of very excitable children doing Lego competitions and robotics. So it'll be a lot of fun.
That is engineers is. Thank you.